So all these things that you quoted as being differentials of power, which women could utilize to enforce their rights, are all run by fucking men. Largely run by men, almost overwhelmingly run by men at every single level. The enforcement arm of the police, the military, the corporations, everything is run by men.
What you're denying right now is the influence that these women embedded in these corporations, embedded in these governments have within. So much so that a lot of these men who are headed a lot of these top institutions are heavily influenced by the women, to the point where a lot of them they have special interest in voting for women, right? They have a lot of special interests vested in that. So
that's right.
You can't just look at that situation.
They have a lot of. They have a lot.
But then you're looking at it purely from a physical and a job perspective.
Look, you're totally right. Look, like, there's nothing to even argue. You're totally right. There's lots and lots and tons and oodles. Hang on, let me finish. Let me finish, Duke.
But you're not. You're leaving out some parts that I have.
Let me finish, Duke.
I want to make sure we're not sitting here in the agreement of the same. Listen, because you're saying it's solely men. I'm saying no. So just keep it at that.
Okay, so Duke, what you're saying here is that if women go vote for their own rights, that all the checks, balances, everything, which is the enforcement arm, is run by men. I totally agree that women can influence men to protect their rights. I'm just disagreeing with you that women themselves can protect their own rights without men, and that men can protect their rights without women. We don't need them to protect our own rights, which is why when you take the anarchy situation where you have like the Black Lives Matter riots, you say, look, when the police don't show up, what happens? Men grab guns and they begin to enforce their own rights. Women aren't doing that. They were not grabbing the fucking guns. They're not enforcing their own rights. They're not doing any of that because they can't. They can't protect themselves against men.
Enforcement.
What's that?
What do you consider enforcement of rights? What
threat of violence? Threat of violence is
the threat of violence.
Yeah, so, that's enforcement.
Well, if we're arguing off of that, then yeah, you have a point, because my thought of enforcement.
Well, what else could it be besides threat of violence? It can't be anything.
You don't have to locking somebody up and arresting them for violating somebody else's rights.
That's threat of violence. That's threat of violence.
That's the threat of just detaining someone.
That's wait. Whoa. Hang on. What happens if you don't want to be detained?
Well, then you get arrested.
Well, how do they arrest you if you don't want to be arrested?
They put you in handcuffs.
They beat your fucking ass, right? And then put your
what? So okay.
You say I don't want to be arrested, officer. Fuck off. And you turn around to walk off. Are they going to tackle you? Are they going to use physical force in order to subdue you?
So they're going to use physical force, but they're not going to beat your ass right off the bat, because remember,
but that's threat of violence. That's violence.
That if officers actually assaulted the people they're arresting, they are liable for that.
That's violence. That's violence. Do you understand that that's all violence? It's all threat of violence. If you don't want to be arrested, the only reason you turn yourself in is because you're told to.
It's threat of loss of freedom.
That's violence. If you hang on,
violence?
Because if you try to escape from prison, what happens?
They catch you.
How? Well, what if you don't want to be caught and you resist?
They physically restrain you, and if they only get violent. Are you trying to say they only get violent if that civilian gets violent?
No, right? What I'm saying is that the threat, the enforcement of all rights is the threat of violence. It has to be necessarily. Because if you don't,
listen, I have a different definition of that. The enforcement is the threat of loss of freedom. That's it. That's really. I'm not.
How can you have your freedom?
But like, here's the thing. The thing is, checks and balances are also, although it's not followed perfectly, there are checks and balances in place when you talk about law enforcement and how they engage with civilians, even civilians who don't adhere to authority right away. There's still levels of engagement. Police forces teach this stuff all the time. They're not gonna go straight to punching you and beating your ass. They're gonna go through these different steps of engagement
as long as you comply.
They get to that point, and for them to get to that point, they have to feel the threat of violence coming from the opposite person. So from your perspective, if the person is actually being physically violent, then yes, that force has every right to meet violence with violence. But
no, they don't have to be
someone. It's not usually violence. It's usually just the threat of loss of freedom. That's it. Loss of freedom and loss of the rights that you signed with the government when you were born or when you
hang on
in the country.
Hang on, relax. You can't sign an agreement when you're born, by the way. But that aside,
it's called a social security number.
That's not signing an agreement. But that aside, as you walk out, if you're in prison, you've been imprisoned, okay, and you just say, fuck this, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't like this whole being imprisoned thing. And the gate opens one day for no particularly good reason. And you just walk out. You're not using any violence at all. And police officers come out to collect you. And you say, I'm not going to use any violence, but I'm going to keep walking this direction no matter what. Right? Will they use physical force to restrain you and drag your ass back to prison?
Yeah.
That's violence.
That's physical force.
It's violence.
They won't.
What is violence then?
They classify it as restrainment. That's a legal term.
Yeah, but it's still violence. It's always threat of violence. They're using violence to stop you from doing X thing you want to do.
Straight punching you or beating you or shooting you.
That's
right
not
away.
violence.
In some cases, yes, but they use restraint. They have their own level. They have literally, they're like, what is it, like 5 steps in like these police departments of threats before they get to the point where they're using violence.
Duke.
So so if you're using law enforcement,
if you grab a person's arm and they don't want their arm grabbed, are you being violent with them?
No. It's a form of restraint. I think punching somebody is a form of violence.
So if somebody was strong enough to hold you in place physically and stop you from moving, you don't think that that's violent?
It depends on how.
They're just holding you and you can't move.
That's restraint.
Yeah, so that's not violence in your mind. So if somebody who's super strong, so if you went
violence, where it turns to violence is while they're restraining that individual, they're punching them. They're committing some kind of
so hang on. So if a 5 foot, let's say you were dating a 4'9" woman, okay, and she was 96 pounds. And you went over to her and said, you ain't leaving, bitch. And you grabbed her. You didn't hurt her, but you grabbed her and you held her in place and said, you can't fucking move from this spot until I say so. And you wouldn't let her go. You're saying that that's not violence?
Legally, they call that a tort.
Is it violence, though?
It's technically just a 1 step below battery.
So is it violence?
What are we talking about? Are we talking about your definition or legal definition?
Your definition. Is that violence?
I'm talking about the legal definition. It's a
tort.
What
is your
misdemeanor tort?
You don't think that's, do you think that's violence or not, Duke?
I think it's restraint.
Do you think that, so you don't, would you say then the answer is no, Andrew, you're not being violent with this woman?
Physically restraining someone is not being violent.
So then just say no. Just say no, that's not violence.
You can classify that as assault. I would go with you on that definition, but saying it's violence, that starts to lead to a slippery slope, because anyone who says, oh, well, I didn't like the way that guy grabbed my arm, that's also all of a sudden considered violence. That's
not, so then if you grab a 4'9" woman, and you're not hurting her, but you won't allow her to move, and she wants to move and she wants to leave, and you won't let her, and you're holding her in place. I need you to tell me, I need you to, hang on, Duke. I just need you to say, Andrew, that's not violence.
No, that's not violence. It's restraint.
Okay. Well, then there's nothing more I can say to that.